Our next guest is a member of the organization called National Security Leaders for America. He has served 6 sea tours with units of the Atlantic and Pacific fleets. He was deployed 7 times to Europe, the Persian Gulf, and the Western and South Pacific. We are so honored to have him here. Retired Rear Admiral Joe Sestak. Good morning, sir. How are you?
Morning, Jane. Thanks for having me aboard.
We are so delighted to have you here. We have talked to a number of members of National Security Leaders for America over the last several months because I think it's important that people understand that not every current or former member of the military is necessarily a Trump supporter. And that's kind of what national security, well, we'll start with that. What brought you to National Security Leaders for America?
Well, I always, I was in the Navy and I got out and my daughter had brain cancer. I ran for Congress and people used to ask me, why'd you change from an independent to become a Democrat? And I was running in a nearly 2-to-1 Republican district. I said, well, it's the military. They taught me everybody has excellent health care. Women get paid from day one, equal pay as men. And you stay in long, you get a career training for a lifetime that serves you well later on. And if you stay in long enough, you get a pension. I used to tell my district, everybody in the military is a Democrat. They just don't realize it.
Well, I think sometimes for some of our listeners that previous guests, there's this assumption that they're all crazy liberals and, therefore they would not support the greatest president in our lifetime. And so tell us a little bit about your experience. You just mentioned that you were an independent, you switched to a Democrat, but you were in the military for a long time.
And I loved it. I wanted to be in there since third grade. And I truly just enjoyed it. And it wasn't the going to sea as much. It was that coming together as a crew. I mean, where you knew everybody had your back and it was the camaraderie and all, but it was also something else. You really got to know about all Americans, particularly the working people. And that's our enlisted. I mean, that's quite frankly why I'm really taken with Tim Walz as a vice presidential candidate. Why? Because, I mean, he didn't master the craft of political rising up through the streams. He actually mastered the craft of being a working man. I mean, he was three jobs.
Yep.
And then that's what our enlisted men do. When General Akrameyev came over from Russia, the Soviet Union, and Admiral Crowd took him around, aircraft carrier, army installations. At the end of it, he said, Marshal, because he was the highest ranking general they had, what most impressed you about America? He said, your enlisted men.
Wow.
We don't have them. I got to tell you, Crowd then explained when he talked about it, that those are the people who speak up and tell you like it is. Now, that might seem small, but I can tell you times where one of those young men and women of America, the working people, grabbed my elbow one time and he had told me to take a come hard right. I kept going. He grabbed it and said, Captain, actually he commanded me, turn right now. I put that in the military, I've got great faith in the people of America. I mean, they come from all over. Oh, today, if you look at the statistics, about 42% come from about 5 states, all in the South. And we need to get that more broad to make sure. But I think that's where you learn. My big experience, you had a lot of great times, went to war, did that. I mean, I commanded carry a battle group and all in a war. But I got to tell you, it was the people I was most taken with. And I do not say that lightly.
That just speaks very highly. It really does. And I can also appreciate, because of all your experience and all of your firsthand experience working with, as you said, the working people, when you got your first look at Project 2025, what was your impression after you slogged through the 953 pages of it?
It's probably exactly what I told you. Here is that young enlisted man or woman that actually could feel free, as Admiral Krauss said, to speak their mind, not what someone else tries to tell you is the right way. And I think there's this, it just seems like there's a desire in this document for a codification of how you must think. So when you see them saying, well, you got to take every regulation, every law that has the word abortion in it and remove it. I, I don't understand that. This is how can you say what words can or can't be used? I mean, that's kind of but it's there in Project 2025. My real concern as I read it, though, three major ones. The first was international. We're at a pretty tenuous time right now. We have Russia in Europe. We have China in the Western Pacific. We have in the Middle East, we have Iran. And then there's that small little state that always is a little rascal, North Korea. And you have seen them over this past year or two slowly build a coalition. Right now, we are not the America superpower of the 50s where we were über alles. We need allies. When I arrived with my carrier battle group in the Persian Indian Ocean to begin the strikes of our battle group against Afghanistan, I had 12 U.S. ships, but waiting there for me to join up with us was a larger armada of other nations that had come there to be with us. They were there. Japan, for the first time, was outside the Sea of Japan since World War II with 4 ships. So I step back and say, our alliances, NATO, how we bind with North Korea, South Korea, how we stand firm with them, whether it's Taiwan or Ukraine, I'm worried, first and foremost, that understanding that diplomacy first, backed by a strong deterrence of allies, we can't do it all ourselves, is my primary concern. The other two I'm happy to talk about, but that is first and foremost because of my background, what I'm concerned about.
Absolutely, because you've seen it firsthand and you know how diplomacy works and you know the importance of allies. And the whole suggestion from Donald Trump and a second Trump administration that they would consider leaving NATO would be like a big birthday gift for Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong Il and all of these guys. That's like their biggest dream, wouldn't it be?
Absolutely right. They offer, and this is what is the most concerning, as you look at how our nation has become divided, of how we could have a commander in chief, a president that can actually put down nations in Africa and call them nothing nations, or how they can reach over to Europe and brusquely treat them as though they're not equal. We can't do this by ourselves. We need them. And that to me is the major concern. I can remember when, and it's kind of humorous, but I'll never forget. And this goes to people who don't think they're there for us. When the Italians were a little late sending their ship over, Minister of Defense sent a message out. And he said, "We're coming. He's just deployed." And then he said, "Many people," and this was in a message, "might think of us Italians as only lovers. But America has been struck," because it was after 9/11, "and we will be there for them." I'll never forget, and I know this is a story, but that's what sailors talk about to make a point. When I went with my wife, finally convinced someone to marry me at the age of 49. I claim there was too much seat time, but I'm not so sure. But in any case, went there and we're out there in southern France, and wonderful place. Walk out in this little veranda on this lawn and look into the distance. And in the middle of this meadow, in the twilight, were about 300 people sitting in tuxedos, sitting in gowns in a field with an orchestra playing. And I went back inside. I said, "Can you tell me what's going on?" And he said, "Yes. Every year this village comes together and celebrates their liberation when the GIs came through."
Wow.
They haven't forgotten.
Wow.
And I think that's what we have to understand, that right now you've got an authoritarian world order that is arising, where they offer security and stability, just not freedoms. They say that democracy isn't giving you security and stability. I mean, look at times where we had the charge right up the Capitol. And they say, "See, that wouldn't be permitted for us," as they say to leaders in Africa, which in the future is going to be one of the biggest economic markets for us. And so it is the economy right now, today, when you have this intersection between geopolitics, technology, and global economies intersecting, every issue is a national security issue, whether it's making chips or whether it's making sure that we have the rights to a base in the Solomon Islands, not a security agreement, an economic agreement that China has with them in order to help us get to Taiwan if we need to.
If you're just tuning in right now, we are talking to retired Rear Admiral Joe Sestak from National Security Leaders for America about the importance of, our U.S. military staying in NATO and how Project 2025 can really pose a threat to both of them. And something you just brought up was the rise of the authoritarian model around the world. And one of the things that Donald Trump has done is made it seem okay that these leaders are around and they're good guys and, I'm friends with them and I can take care of them. But the conversation I always try to have with people who buy that is these are leaders who are suppressing the thing that you are most critical about, which is retaining your freedom, living in a free country. If that happens here, those freedoms go away. Just because you side with dear leader doesn't mean one day that they decide you're not loyal enough for them. So it always seems weird to me that they can put aside freedoms for winning and having their guy in charge. And as a military person, I know that has to not be something that you see as what you fought for all those years in your service.
I think you're correct. It gets to my second point I'm concerned about. Alexander Hamilton said, "We have nothing to fear from an independent judiciary branch. We have everything to fear if there is to be a union between the judiciary branch and either the legislative or executive branch." That is why every president has had the norm and accepted it, that there is a barrier between the Justice Department, really an arm of the justice system, and the White House. If you remove that, particularly if you say, I then am going to appoint somebody who I tell who to prosecute, who to investigate, and then to give the guys that it's okay, they appoint because your person is in charge of the Justice Department, and you appoint someone there to then go and investigate it as a special counsel under the guise of saying, look, we think that counterterrorism is a concern. Now, that could be where there is a movement that isn't violent, but troublesome. And all of a sudden, you begin to have an investigation for criminal intent, which all it needs is Justice Department to do an investigation is criminal intent. And then you're there looking at, I don't know, Black Lives Matter movement and all. Infringement upon freedom isn't just saying you can't say the word abortion in the law. It goes well beyond that to where people are hindered because they do think, as in China, if I say something wrong about the government, I could be investigated.
Absolutely.
Important.
We have a break coming up. We will be back with you if you can stay with us for one more break. Retired Rear Admiral Joe Sestak is our guest. He's with National Security Leaders for America. Stay here. You're listening to Matenaer On Air on the Civic Media Radio Network. Good morning and welcome back to Matenaer On Air. Jane Matenaer, Greg Bach, Dr. Slide on the board. Coming to you from our studio in downtown Waukesha. You can join us. Call or text at 855-752-4842. Just a reminder, tomorrow is primary day. 2 very important constitutional amendments are going to be on the ballot. No matter where you are in Wisconsin, these 2 constitutional amendments will essentially take more spending power away from the governor in emergency situations and give it to the legislature. Wisconsin's legislature has the distinction of being one of the least productive legislatures in the country.
Hey, be nice. They're on a 10-month vacation.
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't mean to take stabs at them while they're away. But yes, so go tomorrow. Please vote. Be a voter. It's very, very important. Vote no.
Yep.
Just saying. All right. Our guest is retired Rear Admiral Joe Sestak. He is with the group that we've spoken to many times before, National Security Leaders for America. And we're talking about Project 2025. In my estimation, Sir, I don't care what the Trump campaign says that they know nothing about Project 2025. I think that's baloney. And I think if he gets reelected, the architects behind this will begin to implement Project 2025 immediately. Now, what would that mean for politicizing our military? How exactly would that work?
Well, there's two ways to look at that, I think. One is, I think, of actually more concern. And that is if the President of the United States decided that to use the loophole in what's called posse comitatus, where it is forbidden that you can ever use your military to enforce civil laws and things. You just can't do it. Now, that we got to keep in mind, posse comitatus wasn't passed until after Grant left office, because Grant had used the federal troops to crush the Ku Klux Klan when they tried to rise up during the restoration. Thank you. But when the new president came in, the Congress passed this so that federal troops couldn't be it. And posse means posse, like in the West, that now the sheriffs locally could raise people up to enforce the law. So it was actually to permit the Ku Klux Klan to rise again. Jim Crow laws that's when it began. Today, we like it because despite that beginning, because you can't use the military to all of a sudden like create martial law or anything. However, there's a big loophole called the Insurrection Act that for George Washington and President Obama has used. And that Insurrection Act permits you to use the military if there's rebellion, but also if to enforce federal law or like civil rights. That's what Eisenhower did. You know, Lyndon Baines Johnson used them for the march from Selma to Montgomery. It's had good use at times. However, what does that mean if someone says, I am going to use them in order, like they wanted to in Oregon, to have federal troops all of a sudden intervene out there to try to restore what it deemed undue protest? And so how violent are protests? What's the spectrum? I mean, and so that is where you begin to get concerned, could our military be misused under the Insurrection Act? I mean, right now, we kind of are doing it to some degree. There's something else, a third one called Title 32. And again, President Obama, President Biden, President Trump have all used it to say, we, the government, are going to pay for the federalization, not pay for you, state governor, to use because you're in charge of the National Guard on the borders to, quote, protect our borders. We've done that. But what's the next step after that? Because the Supreme Court made a decision back in the 1820s or 30s that if the president uses the military under the Insurrection Act, he cannot be held liable. It is official, much like the Supreme Court kind of said recently about it. And so this is a pretty interesting area right here. The second one is, and I'm asked this a lot, politicizing our military. And often people think, if you're given an illegal order, what would someone do at the top? I have to first say, I think that is the least of our concerns. Could it happen? Yes. We start right off as officers with civil military relations. It is ingrained in us. But that doesn't mean we've had retired generals that have argued for using the military, such as General Flynn. And so there's nothing that says the president can't call back to active service those type of individuals. But can it also impede other things where, for example, 2025 says we must go through and stop Marxist leanings within any of the doctrines taught at our service academies? My gosh. I backpack through communist Eastern Europe as a young officer, through communist China the first year they opened it up to individual travel. You can tell I was a bachelor at the time still. I should have been looking for somebody during that period of time. And man, I came back and I do remember the NIS, you see them on television. Well, they're a lot tougher. I felt like I was guilty for going back to see where my father had emigrated from, in Eastern Europe. No, but all of a sudden, not to know your adversary or whatever it is, understand something. I mean, where's you want your officers to have understanding. So can it impede you? Yes. But we also have to think about something else. We can't go overboard the other way. And if I might, and perhaps some will disagree with me on this, I know the concern people often had about military people. Jane, you kind of alluded to it, how people think about us military. I can remember when up for the Sierra Club endorsement the first time, and I'm in a nearly 2-to-1 Republican district, so I thought I'm going to get the Sierra endorsement locally. Afterwards, one of the board members, when I didn't get it, said, "You guys got to wait a while. This one gentleman says he's military, kind of Vietnam age. Can we trust him?" There's still that inkling. And I think that's important to keep in mind that when, in some of the services, when those protests were happening, they asked retired military in some of the services, if they were still working there, to raise their hand and take the oath of allegiance again. And I think there's a fine balance here. Should it be kept in mind? Yes, but I'm not as concerned.
Retired Rear Admiral Joe Sestak with National Security Leaders for America has been our guest. Thank you so very much, sir, for your service and your insight and your time. It's greatly appreciated.